The day my son became rich, I thought my sacrifices had finally meant something. Instead, he and his wife threw my clothes onto the street and told me to leave like a stranger. I walked away without arguing, without crying, because I was hiding a truth they never imagined. And when that truth came out, their wealth couldn't save them from shame. I still remember the night my son was born because it was the same night his father walked out of our lives. The rain was heavy, pounding against the tin roof of the small room we rented, and the power had gone out hours earlier. I held my newborn close to my chest, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. His father stood near the door, his bag already packed, his face cold and distant. He said he wasn't ready for responsibility, that this life was too small for his dreams. Then he left just like that, without looking back. From that moment on, it was just me and my son, Amir, against the world. I worked wherever I could, washing dishes, cleaning houses, stitching clothes late into the night. My hands were always rough, my back always aching, but every time I looked at Amir sleeping peacefully, I felt strong again. I skipped meals so he could eat. I wore the same worn-out shoes for years so I could buy his school books. When he fell sick, I stayed awake all night, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead and praying silently. As Amir grew older, he became my pride. He was smart, curious, and kind, or at least he used to be. Teachers praised him, neighbors admired him, and people often told me, "One day, your son will be a great man." Those words kept me going when my body felt like giving up. I believed them with all my heart. When Amir got into university, the fees were more than I earned in months. I sold the little gold ring my mother had given me, the last thing of value I owned. I didn't tell Amir. I just smiled and told him everything would be fine. He studied hard, graduated with honors, and soon landed a job at a growing company. That was when our lives began to change. Money started coming in, slowly at first, then faster. Amir moved us from our tiny rented room into a decent apartment. For the first time in years, I slept on a real bed. I thought this was the reward for all the years of struggle. Then he met Lena. Lena was beautiful, confident, and came from a wealthy family. From the beginning, I felt invisible around her. She was polite, but distant, always correcting the way I spoke or dressed with a soft smile that felt sharp. When they got married, I gave them my blessings and stayed quiet. I told myself that once Amir was happy, nothing else mattered. But after Amir's business took off and his income multiplied, things changed. Lena started redecorating the house, throwing out old furniture, including things I used. She complained that I didn't fit their new lifestyle. Amir, my Amir, began avoiding my eyes. Conversations became short. Smiles disappeared. One evening, Lena finally said what she had been thinking all along. She told Amir that having his poor mother living with them made their home feel crowded and uncomfortable. She said successful people needed space and privacy. Amir didn't argue. He just nodded. The next morning, they handed me a small suitcase. Lena told me calmly that it would be better if I moved out. Amir stood there in silence. I searched his face, hoping to see even a trace of the boy I raised. There was nothing. My heart broke, but I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I picked up my suitcase, looked at my son one last time, and walked out the door. As it closed behind me, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made. But I also felt something else resolve. Because I knew a truth they didn't. And soon, that truth would change everything. The street outside their apartment felt colder than I expected, even though the sun was still high. People walked past me, busy with their own lives, unaware that a mother had just been erased from her son's world. I sat on a bench nearby, holding my small suitcase, letting the shock settle into my bones. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford tears anymore. I found a cheap guest house on the edge of the city, the kind of place people only stayed when they had nowhere else to go. The room was small, but it was clean, and that was enough. That night, as I lay on the narrow bed, memories flooded my mind. Amir's first steps, his first day of school, the nights I stayed awake sewing just to pay his fees. I wondered how love could fade so completely. The next morning, I visited an old friend, Fatima, who ran a small community center. She was shocked to see me alone. When I told her what happened, her eyes filled with tears. She offered me a place to stay, but I refused. I told her I had something important to do first, something I had delayed for too long. Years ago, when Amir was still in school, I had quietly invested a small amount of money in a cooperative savings program started by women like me. It wasn't much at first, just tiny amounts saved over time, but I believed in it. I never told Amir because I didn't want him to feel pressured. Over the years, that investment grew. Then I used it to help start a modest food business, operating under someone else's name, staying in the background. It became successful, far more than anyone expected. That business now employed dozens of people. It supported families. And legally, it belonged to me. I walked into the office that managed the business, my head held high. The staff greeted me with respect, calling me Madam, a title I wasn't used to hearing. As I sat in the chair reviewing reports, I felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. Pride in what I had built silently, sadness that my own son never knew this side of me. Meanwhile, Amir and Lena were enjoying their success, hosting parties, talking about investments, unaware that their world was about to collide with mine. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted them to understand what they had done. So I made arrangements. I scheduled a public charity event through my business, one that would attract media attention and influential people. Amir's company was invited as a potential partner. He accepted, eager to expand his network. On the day of the event, I stood backstage, listening to the hum of the crowd. My hands trembled slightly, but my heart was steady. This was not about humiliation. This was about dignity. As I prepared to step forward, I thought of the woman I had been: poor, tired, invisible. And I smiled softly, because that woman had survived everything. And now, the hall was filled with well-dressed guests, soft music playing in the background. Amir stood near the front with Lena, both of them smiling confidently as they greeted people. He looked successful, powerful, exactly like the future everyone once predicted for him. But when I stepped onto the stage, everything changed. There was a brief silence. Amir's smile faded as his eyes landed on me. Confusion crossed his face, followed by disbelief. Lena's expression hardened. She leaned toward him, whispering something urgently. I began to speak, my voice calm but strong. I talked about the importance of perseverance, about unseen sacrifices, about how many people build success quietly while others take the spotlight. The audience listened intently. Then I revealed my identity, not as Amir's mother, but as the founder and owner of the company hosting the event. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Amir's face went pale. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Lena's confident posture collapsed. I looked directly at my son and said gently, "Some people think worth is measured by money and status. But true value comes from loyalty and gratitude." The words hung in the air like a verdict. After the event, Amir approached me, his voice shaking. He asked why I never told him. I told him the truth, that I didn't want his love to depend on my wealth, that I wanted to be his mother, not his investment. Lena tried to apologize, blaming stress, misunderstandings, anything she could. I listened quietly. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. My silence was heavier than anger. That night, Amir realized what he had lost. The woman who stood before him was no longer dependent, no longer invisible. She was strong, independent, and deeply wounded. In the days that followed, Amir came to see me repeatedly. Each visit, his shoulders seemed lower, his voice softer. He spoke of regret, of sleepless nights, of realizing how empty his success felt without respect. Lena sent messages, long apologies filled with promises. I read them, but I didn't rush to respond. I needed time. Forgiveness is not something you give just because someone asks. It grows slowly, like trust. I moved into a modest home of my own, funded by my work, not by anyone's charity. I continued running my business, expanding programs to help struggling mothers like I once was. Each woman I helped felt like a piece of my own healing. Amir began volunteering at the center, quietly at first. He listened to stories that mirrored my own sacrifices. Slowly, I saw understanding in his eyes, not just guilt, but growth. One evening, he sat across from me and cried like a child. He said, "I forgot who you were to become who I wanted to be." Those words broke something open inside me. Time passed, and wounds slowly turned into scars. I didn't move back into Amir's home, and I never would. Some boundaries, once crossed, must remain. But I allowed him back into my life as my son, not my savior, not my boss. Lena changed too, humbled by what she had witnessed. Whether that change would last, only time would tell. I stayed kind but cautious. Today, when people ask me how I survived being thrown out by my own child, I smile softly. I tell them survival wasn't the hardest part. Staying dignified was. I lost a home, but I found my voice. I lost comfort, but I gained respect. And the truth I carried silently taught my son a lesson no amount of money ever could. Sometimes, the strongest move you can make is walking away quietly, because when you return, you do so on your own terms. As the door closed behind me, the sound echoed in my chest longer than it should have. I stood outside the building for a few seconds, holding the small suitcase Lena had pushed into my hands, as if my entire life could fit inside it. People passed by, laughing, talking on their phones, living their normal lives. No one noticed the woman who had just been discarded by her own son. I walked without direction at first. My feet moved on their own, carrying me through streets I didn't recognize anymore. This city had grown alongside Amir's success, but somehow it had shrunk for me. Every shop window reflected a tired woman with gray creeping into her hair and eyes heavy with unspoken pain. I wondered when I had started looking so old. Maybe it was the years of worry. Maybe it was the moment my son chose silence over me. I finally sat on a bench near a small park. Children were playing, their mothers watching closely, scolding them gently, pulling them back when they ran too far. I watched one little boy fall and scrape his knee. His mother rushed to him, held him, kissed the wound like it could erase the pain. My chest tightened. I had done that for Amir 1,000 times. And yet, when I fell, no one came running. Night approached quickly. I counted the little money I had left and found a cheap guest house not far away. The room smelled of old walls and disinfectant, but it had a bed and a lock on the door. That was enough. I sat on the bed and finally allowed myself to breathe. Not cry, just breathe. That night, sleep refused to come. My mind replayed everything. Lena's cold voice, Amir's lowered eyes, the way he didn't even try to stop me. I asked myself where I went wrong. Was loving him too much a mistake? Was sacrificing everything the wrong lesson to teach a child? Near dawn, I made a decision. I would not go back. Not to beg, not to explain, not to remind them of who I was. If Amir wanted to remember his mother, He would have to do it without my tears guiding him. The next morning, I washed my face, tied my scarf neatly, and went to see Fatima. She had been my friend for decades, someone who knew my struggles better than anyone. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with my suitcase, her smile disappeared instantly. "What happened?" she asked softly. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her hand covering her mouth in disbelief. When I finished, she hugged me tightly and told me I could stay as long as I wanted. I thanked her, but I said no. I explained that I needed to stand on my own, the way I once did. Before leaving, I asked her to help me contact some people, old contacts, quiet contacts, the kind of people who knew how to work without noise. Fatima looked at me curiously but nodded. She had always trusted my instincts. Years earlier, when Amir was still in school and money was painfully tight, I had joined a women's saving circle. We were cleaners, cooks, widows, abandoned wives. Every week, we saved a little. Most people laughed at us, saying poor women couldn't build anything meaningful. But we believed in patience. Over time, that small circle grew into a cooperative, then into a business idea. I stayed in the shadows on purpose. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want Amir to know. I wanted him to succeed on his own, to believe in his abilities, not lean on mine. As the years passed, the business flourished. It expanded into food production and local supply chains. It employed people who had once stood exactly where I stood now, lost, tired, and invisible. That business had never stopped growing. And legally, quietly, undeniably, it belonged to me. When I walked into the office that managed it, the staff stood up respectfully. Some of them smiled warmly, happy to see me after so long. They asked if everything was okay. I told them I was ready to be more involved now. No more hiding. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, strength. Meanwhile, Amir was enjoying the peak of his success. His company was being talked about in business circles. Lena was busy planning social events, posting perfect photos, building an image of a flawless life. To them, I had already disappeared. A problem solved. A past erased. They had no idea that their future was about to intersect with mine in a way they never expected. I didn't rush. I planned carefully. I arranged a charity and business collaboration event under my company's name, one big enough to attract attention, media, and investors. Invitations were sent out, including one to Amir's company. Of course, he accepted. Opportunities like this were exactly what he lived for now. On the day of the event, I stood backstage listening to the crowd. My heart beat steadily. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I thought of the night Amir was born, of the promises I whispered to him in the dark. I had kept every one of them. Now it was time to keep one more, to myself. The moment I stepped into the hall, the sound softened, as if the room itself sensed something was about to change. Soft lights reflected off polished floors, and conversations blended into a low, confident hum. This was the world Amir belonged to now. Tailored suits, practiced smiles, ambition wrapped in polite laughter. I stood just behind the curtain listening. I heard Amir's voice before I saw him. He sounded confident, relaxed, nothing like the boy who once clutched my hand before school exams. Lena laughed beside him, her tone light and proud. They were greeting guests, shaking hands, speaking about growth, vision, and future partnerships. Each word felt like it came from a life that no longer included me. A staff member leaned toward me and whispered, "Madam, we're ready when you are." I nodded slowly. My palms were warm, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. I adjusted my scarf, took one deep breath, and stepped forward. As I walked onto the stage, the host announced my name as the founder and chairperson of the company. Applause filled the hall. It was polite at first, then stronger. Faces turned toward me with interest, respect. And then silence. Amir froze. I saw it clearly. His smile faded mid-breath. His eyes narrowed, then widened, as if his mind was struggling to catch up with what his heart already knew. Lena's hand tightened around his arm. She leaned closer to him, whispering urgently, but he didn't respond. He was staring at me, his mother, standing on a stage he believed belonged to people like him now. I didn't look away. I walked to the center of the stage and placed my hands calmly on the podium. The microphone carried my voice smoothly across the room. I spoke slowly, deliberately, each word chosen with care. I talked about beginnings, about starting with nothing but belief, about invisible hands that build foundations no one applauds. I spoke about women who save coins while others chase applause, about mothers who pour their lives into children without asking for anything in return. The room grew quiet. People leaned in. As I spoke, Amir's face changed again. Confusion gave way to realization. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Lena's confident posture stiffened. Her eyes darted around, suddenly aware of how many people were watching. Then I said it. I said I was the founder of the company, that I had built it quietly over decades, that I believed real power didn't need noise. The murmurs spread through the audience like a wave. Heads turned toward Amir and Lena, then back to me. I let the silence sit for a moment. Silence can say things words never can. My eyes found Amir's. I didn't accuse him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, some people believe success gives them the right to forget where they came from. But success without gratitude is just emptiness wearing a nice suit. The words landed hard. Applause followed, but it sounded distant to me. I finished my speech with grace, thanked the guests, and stepped down. As I walked off stage, my legs felt light, almost unreal. Not because I had won, but because I had finally been seen. Amir didn't wait long. He approached me near a quiet corner, his face pale, his voice shaking. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Not angrily. Broken. I looked at him for a long moment. This was my child. The same child whose shoes I once patched with thread so he wouldn't feel different at school. "I wanted you to love me because I was your mother," I said softly. "Not because I owned something. Not because I had power." His eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Lena stepped forward then. Her voice trembled as she apologized, words tumbling over each other. She blamed stress, misunderstandings, fear of image. I listened. I really did. But excuses sound different when your heart is already tired. "I never wanted to be a burden," I said calmly. "I just wanted respect." She lowered her eyes. Amir reached for my hand, but I gently pulled it back. Not in anger, in truth. "I need time," I told him. "Being your mother doesn't mean I don't feel pain." That night, I left the event alone. Not in shame, not in silence, but in dignity. Outside, the air felt lighter. The city lights no longer mocked me. They simply existed. Behind me, Amir stood in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. His success no longer felt complete. For the first time since he became rich, he understood the cost of forgetting love. And for the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully. The days after the event passed more slowly than I expected. Fame has a strange way of changing the air around you, and suddenly people who had never noticed me before were calling, asking for meetings, interviews, opinions. I declined most of them. I hadn't revealed myself to be celebrated. I had done it to breathe again. I moved out of the guest house and into a small, quiet home not far from the community center Fatima helped run. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Through the window in the mornings, and for the first time in years, I arranged a space exactly how I liked it. Simple furniture. A few plants. Silence that felt peaceful instead of lonely. Amir, however, did not find peace so easily. He came to see me 3 days after the event. I knew it was him before I opened the door. A mother always knows. When I did open it, he stood there without the confidence he usually carried, his shoulders slightly bent, his hands empty. No gifts. No excuses ready. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside and let him enter. He looked around the house, taking in the modest space, the absence of luxury. His eyes filled with confusion again. "You could live anywhere," he said. "Why here?" I poured tea and answered calmly, "Because comfort doesn't heal wounds. Peace does." He sat across from me, staring at his cup for a long time. Then the words finally came. He spoke about how ashamed he felt standing in that hall, how small he suddenly realized he was. He admitted that success had changed him, that he had started measuring people by how useful they were to his image. Hearing him say those words hurt more than if he had denied everything. "I let Lena talk me into it," he said, his voice breaking. "But the truth is, I agreed. And that's worse." I didn't interrupt him. This was his confession, not my trial. He told me he hadn't slept since the event, that every time he closed his eyes, he remembered moments he had ignored. Me waiting up late for him, me eating last, me pretending not to be tired. "I thought being rich meant I had outgrown my past," he whispered. "Now I realize I abandoned it." Tears ran down his face, unguarded and raw. For a moment, I wanted to pull him into my arms like I used to when he was small. But I didn't. Not yet. "Regret is a beginning," I said gently. "Not a solution." He nodded. Lena came later that week. She didn't enter confidently like before. She stood at the door, hesitant, as if unsure she deserved to step inside. When I invited her in, she sat stiffly, hands folded tightly in her lap. She apologized again, this time without blaming anything else. She admitted she was afraid of losing status, afraid of being judged, afraid of poverty returning through me. Her honesty surprised me, but honesty doesn't erase harm. It only explains it. "I forgot that you are a person," she said quietly. "Not a symbol." Those words stayed with me long after she left. In the weeks that followed, Amir asked if he could help at the community center. Not as a sponsor. Not as a boss. As a volunteer. I watched him from a distance at first, listening to struggling mothers, carrying supplies, sitting on the floor with children. He didn't announce who he was. For once, he was just another pair of hands. One afternoon, I overheard him talking to a young boy whose story sounded painfully familiar. The boy asked him, "Do you think my mom will be proud of me one day?" Amir's voice trembled as he answered, "She already is. Even if you don't see it yet." That was the moment something inside me softened. One evening, Amir came to my house again. He didn't talk much. He simply helped me wash dishes the way he used to when he was a teenager. As we stood side by side, the silence felt different, less heavy, more honest. "I don't expect you to forgive me quickly," he said. "Or ever, if that's what it takes. I just want to learn how to be your son again." I looked at him then, really looked at him. He was no longer the boy I raised, but he wasn't the man who threw me out either. He was somewhere in between, lost, learning, humbled. "I won't move back," I said clearly. "And I won't pretend it didn't hurt." "I know," he replied. "I wouldn't ask." That was when I knew this wasn't about going back to how things were. It was about building something new, with stronger walls and clearer boundaries. Forgiveness, I realized, is not forgetting. It's choosing to move forward without carrying a knife in your heart. And for the first time since I walked out of my son's house with a small suitcase, I felt like the future, whatever it held, would finally be shaped on my own terms. Time has a way of settling storms that once felt impossible to survive. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life found a new rhythm. I no longer woke up with a heavy chest or slept with questions circling my mind. My mornings began with quiet prayers, warm tea, and the soft sunlight that filled my small home. I had lost a house once, but I had gained something far more valuable: my sense of self. Amir continued visiting, never unannounced, never demanding. He learned to knock, not just on my door, but on my boundaries. Sometimes he brought groceries. Other times he brought nothing but honesty. We talked about ordinary things: work, the weather, memories from his childhood. He laughed differently now, softer, without pride. Success had taught him how to stand tall, but humility had taught him how to bow. I never moved back into his home, and I never would. That chapter had closed the day I walked away with my suitcase. But I allowed him back into my life, not as my protector, not as my provider, but simply as my son. And that made all the difference. Lena changed too, though change is something only time can prove. She stopped chasing appearances and started showing respect through actions, not words. She volunteered quietly, avoided unnecessary attention, and learned to listen more than she spoke. I welcomed her with kindness, but I kept my eyes open. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. My business grew steadily. I expanded programs for abandoned women and struggling mothers, offering not charity alone, but dignity, jobs, training, and belief. Every woman who stood taller because of that work healed a part of me. I saw my younger self in their tired eyes and trembling hands. And every time one of them succeeded, I felt like I had succeeded again too. One afternoon, Amir invited me to an event. This time, he didn't put me in the background. He introduced me proudly, openly, as his mother. Not with status, not with wealth, just with respect. I nodded and smiled, but what mattered most was the way he said it. There was no shame in his voice, only gratitude. Later that night, he said something that stayed with me. "Losing you was the poorest moment of my life," he admitted. "No amount of money has ever scared me the way that did." I reached out and held his hand then. Not because the past no longer hurt, but because the present felt honest. People sometimes ask me how I survived being thrown out by my own child. They expect anger in my answer, bitterness, revenge. But I tell them the truth. Survival wasn't the hardest part. Staying dignified was. I walked away with nothing because I refused to beg for love that should have been freely given. I stayed silent because sometimes silence teaches louder lessons than shouting ever could. And I returned, not to reclaim a place, but to reclaim myself. Life taught my son a lesson no business failure ever could. That wealth can buy comfort, but it cannot buy character. That success means nothing if you forget the hands that lifted you when you couldn't stand on your own. Today, I sit in my own home, surrounded by peace I built with patience and pain. My son visits as a guest, not a savior. My daughter-in-law greets me with humility, not pride. And I wake each day knowing that my worth was never tied to how I was treated. It was tied to who I chose to be. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a mother can do is walk away quietly. Because when the truth finally catches up, it doesn't knock gently. It shakes the entire world. Life doesn't always reward sacrifice immediately. Sometimes it tests it. It strips you of comfort, of recognition, even of family, just to see if your dignity will survive when everything else is taken away. I was thrown out when I was no longer useful, forgotten when I was no longer convenient. But I did not break. I walked away with my head held high, carrying pain in silence and strength in my steps. I chose not to beg for love, not to remind anyone of my sacrifices, and not to trade my self-respect for shelter. And in doing so, I taught a lesson no anger ever could. To every parent who has ever felt invisible after giving their whole life to their children, remember this: your value does not disappear just because someone forgets it. Sometimes, the greatest shock is not revenge, but survival. Not humiliation, but growth. Not shouting, but walking away and becoming more than anyone expected. Because when the truth finally stands in the light, it doesn't ask for forgiveness. It demands understanding.